Okay. All right. We okay on the sound? All right. Good. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Scott Peters. I represent San Diego, Coronado, and Poway in the United States Congress. And we're gathered here this morning outside the Midway Post Office, one of our critical sorting locations in San Diego, to demand funding needed to keep our Postal Service running strong. We cannot and we will not allow the President to undermine our Postal Service, our voting rights, or our democracy. Established in the United States Constitution, the Postal Service is the only service, public or private, that reaches every address, delivering to over 160 million residences, businesses, and post office boxes, even in the most remote communities in our land. The Postal Service is at the core of our nation's mailing industry, supplementing and working with private sector senders like UPS and FedEx, who themselves rely on the Postal Service to get letters and packages delivered the last mile of the journey to their final destinations. With over 630,000 employees, the Postal Service is also one of our nation's largest employers. These heroes in blue work days and nights to make sure each of us gets our mail on time, securely, and at an affordable rate. As enshrined in the Constitution, every citizen has the right to receive mail. The USPS provides this service. It is your constitutionally mandated right to receive mail, and no president can rescind that right.
That's right.
We are here today, and we are here today to ensure that San Diegans don't have their mail service slowed or interrupted. Now, last week on TV, President Trump said that he had little interest in keeping the USPS afloat, publicizing his plot to disrupt our mail-in voting system to benefit his own self-interest in winning this year's election. At his order, the Postmaster General has been executing these destructive operational changes, literally seizing mailboxes off of street corners, removing mail sorting machines from post offices, and doing anything he can to keep our Postal Service from running properly. And this is all happening in the middle of a deadly pandemic that has claimed over 170,000 American lives, just months before what is perhaps the most consequential election in our lifetimes. Now, that anyone would seek to intentionally slow down the mail service during this time or any other time defies logic and is an outrage. These changes not only endanger the very building blocks of our democracy, these detrimental policies are taking a heavy toll on millions of Americans who depend on USPS every day. In 2019, 1.2 billion prescriptions were delivered through the United States Postal Service. And the VA, the Veterans Administration, fills about 80% of veterans' prescriptions by mail, with deliveries to about 330,000 veterans across the country each and every day. 330,000 veterans. Veterans who live further from VA medical facilities, especially in rural and remote areas, depend on mail order prescriptions. President Trump's changes have resulted in the VA changing his website already, so veterans know they need to request refills over a week in advance due to the intentional slowdown of the USPS. These delays also threaten the economic security of the American people by preventing the expedient delivery of Social Security benefits, stimulus checks, paychecks, and tax returns, all of which are tied to people's lives and livelihoods as they fight to make it through this public health emergency and economic crisis. My office, and I know you'll hear from my colleagues, we've received almost 100 calls from our constituents within the last week who are struggling with these exact issues. Seniors and veterans worried about medicine and late fees from bills they pay by mail, as well as concerned San Diegans demanding the House to investigate the administration and the Postmaster General's actions to undermine the election. Today I'm joined by our entire congressional delegations, and you'll hear from Rep. Susan Davis, Juan Vargas, and Mike Levin, as well as Assembly Member Todd Gloria, San Diego County Supervisor Nathan Fletcher, and the president of our local chapter of the National Association of Letter Carriers to say enough. This is an assault on the very fabric of our democracy and the thousands of dedicated USPS workers and on every American. The House has been called back to Washington this weekend to vote on a bill that would put an end to the Trump administration's attacks on the Postal Service. Public hearings have been scheduled for next week so that the Postmaster General and the top Postal Service leadership must answer to the Congress and the American people as to why they are pushing these dangerous new policies that threaten to silence the voices of millions. We cannot let this stand. Today, I'd like to invite each of our speakers to talk about the weight of this moment, why we must do everything in our power to save our post office. And we'll begin with my colleague, Representative Susan Davis.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you for bringing us all together, and I want to thank all my colleagues for being here, and certainly all the elected officials that are here as well. In fact, every member of Congress should be holding an event today. Supporting the Postal Service should be a straightforward, nonpartisan issue. Everyone uses the post office and everybody needs it. I want to thank our guests, especially to Ricardo Guzman and Jim Malzenbach and all of our letter carriers and our postal employees that are here and everywhere, because you are essential. You are heroes now even more than ever. Your work should not be threatened by anyone, especially not by our own president. You know, everyone, this is a time of crisis in our country. We're in a crisis of confidence. Because of the pandemic, our lives and our livelihoods are on hold. Families have suffered the loss of loved ones. Our health is vulnerable. Social and economic disparities are laid bare as people are laid off and futures are uncertain. There is one thing that you can count on that touches every household with tremendous efficiency, and that's the Postal Service. You know, sometimes I marvel at this. It is no small miracle that prescriptions, Mother's Day cards and birthday cards, Father's Day cards, even solicitations remind us that life goes on. Life moves on. For a lot of people who are staying at home, their letter carrier may be the person they look forward to seeing every day. And now, for some reason, the mail has been disrupted. Constituents tell me with loud voices through their calls and emails that something is very, very wrong. Suddenly, blue mailboxes have disappeared, sorting machines have been turned off, postal workers have been told to go home and let mail pile up on tables, post office have closed during lunch. And these actions hurt everyone. And at a time when we are trying to get on our feet, it's a mess. So you have to ask yourself, why? Why now? Who would undermine our most beloved institution? Look no further than the coming election. The president fears voting by mail could harm his reelection. He even told us that. Our president, who should be protecting us and fixing the problem, is causing the problem. He is not providing fair and free elections that are safe during the pandemic. He's disenfranchising voters and jeopardizing our democracy. I'm here today to be a voice for my constituents. Almost overnight, we received over 1,400 pieces of mail about the mail. And we have some of our letters that we brought for you today. George in 92115 wrote, quote, "It's not hyperbole to say I rely on USPS," unquote. And Stephanie in 91977 emailed, "I hope Congress will consider this an emergency." We agree. This is an emergency. And we do not want people to have to go to an emergency room or fear they will just to vote. Voting by mail is safe and reliable and what we need in a pandemic. I hope my Republican colleagues in both houses will stop enabling Trump and support the Delivering for America Act and stop the president's attack on our postal system. It's a sad day, my friends, when you have to say it, but the truth is neither snow nor rain nor heat of night nor the president will sabotage our postal service or our elections. Mr. President, please don't mess with USPS, don't mess with our elections, don't mess with Congress, and don't mess with the will of the American people.
Good morning. My name is Juan Vargas. I represent the 51st Congressional District, and I want to start off with a question for you. Who was our first Postmaster General? Benjamin Franklin. Everyone should know that. Benjamin Franklin. Even the microphone knows that because it's twitching here. Is there something wrong with it here? Here comes the technician. It's interesting when I don't talk into it, there's no problem. Benjamin Franklin was our first Postmaster General. And the only little footnote I would actually put on to what Scott said is, yes, the Postal Service is enshrined in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It actually predates it, though. It actually predates. The Postal Service predates the Constitution. It existed before the United States Constitution. That's why the Postal Service has been so important. The Postal Service actually brought the nation together. It was so important that George Washington, our first president, made the Postmaster General a cabinet position. Made it a cabinet position. That's how important it's been from the inception of our country. And I have to tell you, my district is the southern part of San Diego County and Imperial County. In some parts of Imperial County, there are no polling places. You can't go and turn in your ballot to the polling place. They rely on the United States Postal Service, and it works 100% of the time. 100% of the time. It's always there. In fact, when this pandemic hit, people asked all over my district, can we still get our medications? Will our prescriptions still arrive? And I always ask them, is it the Postal Service that's been delivering them? If it is, they absolutely will arrive. They absolutely will, because the Postal Service will be there. The letter carriers will make sure that you get your prescriptions. They're better than almost the U.S. the Marines, I got to tell you. They do arrive in time. The U.S. Marines are great. My father-in-law was a Marine. And that's because, yeah, half of them are Marines, you know. I said that in front of my friend Nathan here, knowing a very proud Marine. But the reality is this is an essential service for Americans, and Americans love it. The service works well. I wish that we politicians had half of the positives that they have. Let's be truthful. I mean, the reality is it's one of the most loved and beloved services that we have in America. Amen. Amen. And to have this president really try to undermine them and ultimately abolish them, if you listen to what he says, is absolutely diabolical. And we have to fight back, and that's why we're here today. We're here to say we're not going to allow him to do this. We're going to stand with those postal workers, those people that have come, those mail carriers, people that work here in the trucks and everywhere. We're going to stand with them to make sure they can continue to do the job that they want to do, because they want to do a good job, and they do a great job, and we stand 100% behind them. So I'm flying back to Washington to vote, but also to say this. Mr. President, do what your own experts, the people that you appointed, have said, and that is to fund the Postal Service. His own board of governors, every single one of them appointed by Trump, have said, fund the Postal Service. These are not my left-wing friends, I wish they were. These are his people. They're the ones that know this is so important. I mean, we all agree, but even his people agree that it has to be done. So again, we're telling the president, do your job. For the last little time that you have. Do your job, because you haven't done it. Les digo a todos que el servicio postal es tan importante, está en la Constitución de los Estados Unidos. El primer Postmaster General era Benjamin Franklin. That's how it sounds in Spanish, Benjamin. Benjamin Franklin. Y este servicio ha sido un servicio esencial desde la incepción de nuestro país. Muy importante, tan importante que el presidente George Washington lo hizo un puesto de gabinete para él. Por eso nosotros tenemos que proteger este servicio. Por eso estamos aquí todos unidos en todos los idiomas. We're united in all languages to say to the president, no. No, you don't. And yes, the people deserve this service, and yes, we will fight to make sure it gets done. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. I introduce my wonderful colleague here, McLevin, who speak both in Spanish and in English.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Juan, and thank you, Scott, for bringing us all together. Thanks to my great colleagues for their hard work, Susan, Juan, and thank you also to Todd and to Nathan for their great leadership at the state level and at the county level. Thanks to our great workers who are here, representing really the best of the best, and thank you to our staff as well for coming together on such short notice. This is such an important issue, and let's make no mistake about why we're here. We're here because our country is facing a crisis right now. The Trump administration's systematic sabotage of the United States Postal Service. Postal Service is part of the foundation of our democracy, enshrined in the Constitution and essential for providing critical services. Millions of Americans depend on the Postal Service to deliver prescriptions, Social Security benefits, paychecks, and yes, absentee ballots. It has a diverse workforce and handles 48% of the world's mail. Think of that. Half the world's mail. However, the new Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, you've heard of him. He is a massive donor to the president. He has investments in something called XPO Logistics to this day, where he makes millions of dollars directly related to the U.S. Postal Service. He is waging a campaign to sabotage the U.S. Postal Service with sweeping new operational changes that delay the delivery of prescriptions and other mail, threatening Americans' lives. Let's be clear about it. Lives are at stake if prescriptions are not delivered on time, much less the eligibility of Americans to cast their vote. And in a pandemic, no one should ever have to choose between their safety and their health and being able to exercise their democratic right to vote. This is fundamental to who we are as a democracy. As a chair of a House Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, I want to speak for just a minute about the impact this has on our veterans. Veterans across the country, including in our region, and I represent North San Diego County and South Orange County, they are telling us that there are dangerous delays regarding the prescriptions that they need, often for life-saving medications. The VA fills about 80% of its prescriptions through the Consolidated Mail Outpatient Pharmacy Program, which uses the Postal Service to deliver to veterans' homes. As was said before, that VA program fills almost 120 million prescriptions a year for our veterans, with deliveries arriving every business day to about 330,000 veterans across this country. And after this press conference, I'm heading up to Oceanside to another post office there at noon, where we're going to be meeting with a number of our veterans, and you'll be able to hear their stories about how important this is to them and the veteran community. Access to prescriptions is particularly important during COVID, right? This isn't that hard to figure out. No veteran, and for that matter, no American, should ever have to wonder why their medication isn't arriving, and we are talking about effects that can be devastating and deadly if doses are missed. Thousands of veterans, including 2,200 who were VA patients, have already died from COVID-19. Not one more veteran should suffer from delayed prescriptions due to this sabotage of the U.S. Postal Service. On another note, the USPS is also one of the largest employers of veterans. Approximately 100,000 veterans and military members work proudly at the U.S. Postal Service. So for this administration to say they care about veterans, well, 100,000 veterans are at risk of losing their jobs. Well, 330,000 veterans a day may go without their prescriptions that they need. Give me a break. Give me a break. So with my colleagues, we're going to be returning to Washington to vote on Chairwoman Maloney's Delivering for America Act. That is a bill I co-sponsored, I imagine we all did, to prohibit the Postal Service from implementing any changes to operations or level of service it had before the pandemic. And you probably know that next Monday, Louis DeJoy, who I just mentioned, that new Postmaster General, he's going to come and testify before the House Oversight Committee. He's going to get asked the tough questions, and we're going to get to the bottom of what's happening. The last thing I'll say is the HEROES Act, which we passed back in May, 3 months ago, flagged this issue and had $25 billion for the USPS. In addition, a bipartisan letter that I led had 137 signatures demanding the funding for the USPS. So this is not a partisan issue, and Senate Republicans ought to wake up. They ought to wake up. We need to come together. We need to get this done on behalf of the American people. We're prepared to go back to Washington to get this done. Mitch McConnell simply is not. And that's just the bottom line about it. The USPS represents everything that is best about America. And if we don't preserve this critical institution, it will severely impact our veterans, our democracy, and fundamentally our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Scott and Susan and Juan. I have to say, a lot of us have been involved in San Diego politics for a long time. We've never had a better House delegation than we have right now. You all agree with me? These fighters that we have? Listen, I will be brief because it is hot and you're out here, but you know what? This event gives me a lot of hope. We heard last night from our forever First Lady that we need to make sure that we bring a chair, that we bring a sack lunch, a dinner, and a breakfast potentially to make sure that we can cast our votes in November. And when I look at this crowd of patriotic San Diegans here to say very clearly, I don't care how hot it is, if I have to wear a mask. I know some of you got dressed up because there's some elected officials here. You want to look good. This is your best pandemic gear you've worn in months. You are fully committed to making sure that our voices are heard in November. And I'm deeply grateful. It gives me hope that this effort that is so transparent, so selfish, so wrong, so un-American will not stand. Thank you guys for being here. And a shout out to the media who is here, who for over 3.5 years now has been taken to slings and arrows. They have been in this position. Our letter carriers are in it today. It is the voters in November, but we will fight back as best we can because we know that this is not who we are as a country. As you've heard all of our members of Congress say, the Postal Service is a fundamental part of our democracy. And we are drawing a line in the sand to say that you will not silence our voices. You will not have us go without our prescription drugs. You will not send more folks into the unemployment line. You will not prevent our economic revival by shutting down mail delivery in this country. So I want to be here on behalf of the state of California to point out that we as a legislature many months ago recognized COVID for what it is, which is an existential threat to our community. And we recognize that this is happening in a year with an election. And so with a 68 aye vote a number of months ago, we voted to make this an all-mail ballot election. Every California registered voter will receive a ballot in the mail. 68 votes. I will point out that that included Republican votes because it's the right thing to do. Yesterday, I was able to work with the chair of our elections committee, my friend, Assemblymember Mark Berman, to get a letter signed by 53 of my colleagues to send to our California congressional delegation to back them up, to say, we want you to go back to Washington, D.C. We want you to fight this administration. We want to make sure that the Postal Service has the resources it needs to carry out this election. California has done its part. We are ensuring that people in this state will receive mail ballots. Now the president and his friends in the Senate must do their jobs and make sure that we can, in fact, cast our ballots. So I am here today to say very explicitly, thank you so much to our San Diego delegation for being here without being asked and saying that they will fight for us when they go back to Washington in the next few days. I'm here to say thank you to all of you for not going quietly where this is concerned, but standing up and speaking out. Many of your faces I have seen before. I know you are not unfamiliar to this fight, but you recognize that this is the fight of our lives. This is the fight for our democracy. Let us fight on until we get this fixed, until we can vote, until we can make change, until we can have our country back. And lastly, I will say to our letter carriers who are here, how about a round of applause for our letter carriers, everybody? Many of you know I only live just right over there, and as I was driving, I watched my letter carrier in her full uniform with a full sack of mail working my block, recognizing it doesn't matter how hot it is today. She's still doing her job because that's what our letter carriers do. That is what they have always done. They are there for us. Let us be there for them. Let's make this right. With all of that said, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend, our county supervisor, Nathan Fletcher. Nathan, come on up.
Thank you, Todd. You know, for more than 200 years, the United States Postal Service has been an institution in this country that rain or shine, hot or cold, uphill, down here, urban, rural, peace or war, global pandemic or not, our letter carriers get out every single day and they deliver care packages to service members, Social Security checks to seniors. Sometimes they bring us bills. But they bring us our ballots. But every single day for more than 200 years, the American people can count on the U.S. Postal Service as a part of the fabric of what brings us together and what binds us. And to have an American president threaten it, and to have an American president tell us explicitly why he's threatening it. He didn't hide his reason. He said, we're going to not fund the Postal Service so people can't vote. Now imagine that. And in addition to the concept of a president threatening the fundamental essence of democracy, which is our elections, he doesn't care if the bystanders are veterans who can't get their medicine. He doesn't care if it's folks who can't be connected. He doesn't care if it's our seniors who are hurt. And so we are here today to stand with our San Diego congressional delegation to say absolutely not. Not here, not now, not ever. We're here today to stand with the letter carriers. The Postal Service is an institution comprised of people who get up every single day. One of the largest employers of veterans in our country, good middle-class jobs. And they serve our community. We're here today to stand for those folks who depend on that postal system for their life, for their well-being. And we're here today to take a stand that every single person and every single vote must be counted. Last year, my office led an effort to increase the county's commitment to making ballots accessible to everyone. We took that action and we took a stand that our democracy is strongest when the most people participate. And so we are not going to sit by and watch a president undermine this election, undermine this institution, and undermine everything we stand for. And we're here today to support our congressional delegation, to stand with our letter carriers, and to fight for every single person out there to say you won't be left behind, you won't be forgotten. We will fight to make sure the Postal Service remains intact and fully funded. Thank you.
Our final speaker is the head of our letter carriers, Roberto Guzman, who's the only person who dressed correctly for the occasion.
I'm sorry, Scott, but it's Ricardo. Ricardo Guzman, president of NLC Branch 70. And I'm going to give you guys a little history so that you guys can have confidence in the U.S. Postal Service and put away this rhetoric that you're hearing that's trying to undermine and, in my opinion, sabotage the United States Postal Service. Let's start off with the current pandemic. As you well know, the United States Postal Service is still providing the service that it has always provided during this pandemic. Okay? I want to remind everyone that the last pandemic we had, which was in 1918, again, the Postal Service survived that pandemic. Before that pandemic, we had to deal with World War I. We survived that. We survived the Great Depression. Okay? We also survived World War II. Do you guys remember the Unabomber? That was scary times for the United States Postal Service and for the general American public. We survived that, didn't we? Anthrax and 9/11 attacks in the same year, and the Postal Service survived that. SARS, you guys remember when we ran through that SARS? We survived that. The recession of 2008 hit so many American people, so many. We survived that. USPS will survive the coronavirus with the assistance, of course, financially, from Congress, which, as you can see, they're here. The politicians that are here today, thank you for that, for the support that they are giving the United States Service, because they know by virtue of supporting the United States Postal Service, they are supporting the American people. Now, with that, I could tell you right now, each and every one of you can have the confidence to vote by mail. Okay? The Postal Service has, throughout the years, proven that we can handle vote by mail. It's safe, it's secure. We as letter carriers are going to make sure you get your ballot delivered to you. We as postal workers are going to make sure that when you drop that ballot in the mail system, it gets processed and then gets delivered to the Register of Voters so that your vote will count. I do want to remind everyone in closing, please, as soon as you get your ballot, vote and put it right back in the system. Don't sit on it and wait. It's so important that we don't have a backlog on the ballots coming in all at one time. As soon as you get it, put in your vote. Let's vote a new president in, and then we'll get on with business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. President of the National Association of Letter Carriers, Branch 70, for the folks out there. We'll be happy to take any questions, or we can do one-on-ones afterward. Any questions?
Is there money involved in this? This is a non-profit organization with almost 250 years that's been in service in the United States. But right now, the situation throughout the whole period of this presidency has been, privatization is going over for the Social Security. So is this about money? Is this all just about money?
Well, I'll let my colleagues speak to this as well, but it's not just about money. It's also about ideology. There's an ideology of trying to privatize the service and get it not to be able to compete against other folks. Two things. Remember, it's a service. It's a service enshrined in the Constitution.